Have you ever felt your heart drum so loudly in your chest that it drowns out every other sound? That was me not too long ago. I'm Jessica Martin, a 32-year-old from Asheville, North Carolina, and I once believed my life was perfect. In the mornings, I would sip coffee in the sunny kitchen of our bungalow, planning weekend barbecues or dreaming of quiet nights on the couch with my husband, Michael. I never imagined myself as someone on the brink of revenge, yet here I stand, replaying every single betrayal in my head, wondering how things spun out of control so fast. My story began simply enough. A few odd looks, a strange text, a slight shift in Michael's behavior. I brushed those warning signs aside until I couldn't anymore. It was one ordinary afternoon when my eyes landed on Michael's phone, lighting up with a message that seemed far too warm for a boring coworker. At first, I froze. Was I reading too much into it? But the hush that followed in our living room spoke louder than any scream. When he left the phone unattended, curiosity gnawed at me like a hungry beast. I peeked, and it felt like stepping off a cliff. All those sly winks in the conversation, the secretive lunch plans, and the sweet promises, none of them were meant for me. The words blurred as I realized my husband was making plans with another woman. My chest felt tight, and it was like the world had tilted off its axis. Right then, I knew my quiet, predictable life was gone. Instead of confronting him that same minute, I found myself stuck in a surreal calm, almost like my mind needed time to catch up with my heart. That night, after he drifted to sleep, I cried in the darkness, pressing my face into a pillow so he wouldn't hear. When the tears dried, my sadness morphed into anger, an anger that pulsed through my veins, telling me I had to do something. It told me I was done being fooled, done swallowing his lies. But what would I do next? Would I throw everything in his face and walk away? Or could there be a smarter path that would give me a sense of power instead of simply letting him off the hook? I realized that if I wanted a real resolution, I needed to outthink him, not just out-yell him. And so began my descent into a plan that would shake both our lives in ways neither of us could have predicted. But this was only the beginning of the storm I was about to unleash. Pretending everything was fine became my new, uneasy routine. Each morning, I'd plaster a smile on my face and watch Michael leave for work, claiming he had late meetings or important deadlines. Each time he lied, I felt the sting in my chest, but I was determined not to let my emotions ruin my chance for something bigger. It was harder in the evenings. He'd come home smelling of fancy cologne that I hadn't bought him, fiddling with his phone, eyes dancing every time a text or notification popped up. My mind would scream, "Ask him, confront him right now." But I needed more proof. I needed something so ironclad that he'd have no excuse to spin. One night, I broke down and called Amanda, my best friend since college. She lived a few blocks away and opened her door at midnight when I couldn't hold back my tears. She was the first person I told about the texts, the suspicious moments, everything swirling in my brain. She wrapped her arms around me and whispered that I wasn't crazy, that I deserved answers, and that she'd help me however she could. That simple act of kindness kept me going in the weeks to come. Each day, I watched Michael's routine. He seemed more stressed, maybe sensing my quietness, but he never asked me directly. It was as if he wanted to keep things smooth, keep me clueless. If I caught him texting, he'd say it was just business. If I asked about dinner, he claimed he was swamped with team-building events. The list of excuses grew, along with my pain. But behind my soft nods and forced laughs, I was building a plan. Late at night, after he fell asleep, I'd open his laptop. Years of marriage meant I knew his passwords, or at least could guess them. My heart pounded every time I typed in those keys. When I finally logged into his email, I almost wished I hadn't. The notes to someone named Alexis painted a picture of a man who was not only cheating, but also weaving a separate life behind my back. He told her I was too busy or too cold to notice. He promised her weekend getaways, fancy dinners, and even mentioned the possibility of traveling out of state together. Rage bubbled inside me. This wasn't just an affair. This was a deliberate mockery of our marriage. But I wouldn't stop there. I snapped screenshots, forwarded messages to myself, built a small treasure trove of evidence. Amanda's voice rang in my head, urging me to be calm, to be certain. I was determined that when I acted, it would be swift, unstoppable, and perfectly timed. I had no idea how far this journey would take me, but each passing day made me more resolved. And as I gathered every text and photo, I realized my next step would be finding out exactly who Alexis was, and whether she had any clue that Michael's life story was built on a web of lies. Little did I know, what I found would send my entire plan veering in a brand new direction. I reached out to Alexis with a shaky voice, unsure if she'd slam the door in my face or if we'd end up screaming at each other. My stomach churned as I dialed her number, half expecting to hear a snide greeting. Instead, I got a timid hello that made my heart race. Trying to keep my words calm, I explained I was Michael's wife and needed to talk to her in person. Her silence on the other end felt like stepping into a void, but after what seemed like an eternity, she agreed. We arranged to meet at a cafe that was both public and quiet enough to talk without drawing too many curious eyes. Sitting at a small table with 2 steaming mugs of coffee, I braced myself for confrontation. Alexis walked in wearing a light jacket, looking more nervous than I was. She sat across from me, her eyes darting left and right as if worried someone might be watching. I remember wondering how this would go. Would she gloat? Or would she cry? Instead, she looked confused. It turned out that Michael had told her a twisted version of our marriage. He'd claimed we were all but separated, that I was the one clinging to old vows. He painted himself as a victim, a man too noble to kick me out, but too lonely to continue living with someone he no longer cared for. Watching her reaction to the real truth made me realize she was just as much a victim as I was. Her tears said it all. She'd believed him and never thought to doubt his stories. He told me you didn't want kids, that you wanted a career more than a family, she whispered, a tear spilling onto her cheek. He said you two only lived together because you couldn't afford separate places. Her heartbreak was real, and I saw in her eyes a mixture of betrayal and guilt. By the time we finished swapping stories, we had a pile of shocking details laid out like a puzzle. She told me about the fancy dinners he'd promised, how he even mentioned wanting her to meet his parents someday, painting me like a stubborn ex who refused to sign divorce papers. Every new piece of information felt like a punch to my gut, but it also formed a strange bond between us. We decided we weren't going to let him keep lying. If Michael thought he could juggle 2 stories without consequences, he was wrong. Alexis, who turned out to be the daughter of Michael's boss, was furious. She had her own pride, and her father had trusted Michael at work, giving him promotions and high praise. Now she felt not only used but humiliated. We realized together that if we wanted real justice, we had to make it impossible for Michael to talk his way out of this. With new resolve in our eyes, we agreed to set a trap that would expose his betrayal in a way he could never deny. We rose from that table determined, 2 women scorned by the same man, about to join forces in a way I never thought possible. And as Alexis and I parted ways, I felt something stirring in me. Not just anger, but a fierce sense of purpose. Something told me Michael had no idea what he was about to face. The plan to corner Michael formed piece by piece, each of us adding our own flair of fury. Alexis knew Michael's weaknesses better than I expected. He's always talking about how he wants to look important, she said, recalling how he'd boast about networking at swanky spots. So we decided that a fancy restaurant uptown, known for its glitzy crowd and watchful eyes, was the perfect stage. He'd be on his best behavior, trying to impress her. Meanwhile, I'd be lurking nearby, waiting to unveil the truth. The night arrived, and I could hardly keep my heart from crashing through my chest. Alexis pretended everything was normal, texting Michael that she had a surprise for him, a special night they could share. He bit the bait, replying with winking emojis and promises to be there on time. I, on the other hand, spent the early evening rehearsing what I'd say when I finally confronted him. Amanda offered to wait outside in case things got too heated. That small show of support meant the world to me. Walking into the restaurant felt like stepping onto a stage. I wore a simple but elegant dress, hoping to blend into the crowd. My eyes scanned the space until I spotted Alexis at a corner table, her features lit by a single candle. She nodded slightly, letting me know Michael was already on his way. My heart pounded as I slipped into a nearby seat, trying to appear calm while I sipped water. Moments later, Michael strolled in, wearing a suit that I had once complimented him on. Back when I had no idea it would be used to impress someone else. He greeted Alexis with a quick kiss on the cheek, making my stomach twist. But I stayed put, waiting for just the right moment. Their conversation started off sweet, with Michael leaning in close, his voice oozing charm. The setting couldn't have been more picturesque. Soft music played, waiters glided around with trays of sparkling glasses, and the chatter of upscale patrons filled the air. I watched his face, noting every smug detail. Finally, when their drinks arrived, I rose from my seat and walked over. My legs felt wobbly, but my resolve was strong. My voice came out quieter than I intended when I said, "Mind if I join you?" Michael's head whipped around so fast I worried he'd strain his neck. His cheeks lost color the moment he recognized me, and for a few seconds, the entire restaurant seemed to go silent. I took the seat across from him, staring him down. Alexis, who had been briefed on what was about to unfold, sat calmly, though I could see her hands shaking under the table. "Jessica," he stuttered, his face frozen in panic. And that was my cue. It was time for the act we'd scripted. The reveal of months of sneaking, lying, and deceit. What happened next would be the kind of scene that stays in everyone's memory for a long, long time. I spread the evidence out in front of Michael like a gambler unveiling a winning hand. Emails, texts, and even photos he'd sent to Alexis from his work trips. Everything lay there for him to see, for the entire restaurant to witness if they wanted. He looked at them, then at Alexis, then at me, his eyes darting as if he were a caged animal seeking a way out. His voice trembled. "We should go somewhere private," he muttered, struggling to keep his composure. But I wasn't in the mood to spare him any dignity. "No," I said firmly, making sure others could hear. "This is where you planned on celebrating your little secret, so let's talk right here." Nearby patrons hushed and turned their heads, some in shock, others in curiosity. Alexis remained poised. She took a deep breath and told Michael how betrayed she felt, not just as a woman but also as the daughter of his boss. She let him know that she already planned to inform her father, who'd placed enormous trust in Michael's work. "You lied to me about everything," she said, her voice shaking yet strong. "And you used my dad's respect for you to get ahead. That ends tonight." For a brief second, I thought I saw tears in Michael's eyes, but then he tried to gather himself. "You can't ruin my career over this," he pleaded in a whisper, as if trying to avoid the ears of the curious diners around us. "Why not?" I shot back. "You had no problem ruining our marriage, disrespecting me at every turn. Why should you get a free pass?" He stumbled over his words, saying something about how he'd been unhappy, how I'd been too busy with my own life to see him drifting away. But I wasn't buying it. None of this was an accident, and none of it was my fault. I told him that not only would I be filing for divorce, but that I'd be seeking my fair share of everything we owned. "Don't bother coming home tonight," I said, a coldness in my tone that was unfamiliar even to me. At that moment, Alexis lifted her glass of water. She'd decided against wine to keep her composure, and splashed it directly into Michael's face. Gasps echoed across the tables. Michael flinched and stared at her, water dripping from his hair and cheeks, completely humiliated in front of half the restaurant. Instead of pity, I felt a weird sense of release. This was what he deserved, a public acknowledgement of his betrayal. With that final gesture, Alexis and I stood up together. We left Michael sitting there, soaked in both water and shame. A few of the onlookers actually clapped softly, as if we'd just finished a powerful stage performance. Outside the restaurant, the cool air hit my cheeks. I realized I was breathing heavily, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Alexis put a hand on my shoulder, a silent show of support. And in that moment, I understood I'd taken a massive step, not just in exposing Michael, but in reclaiming the part of me he tried to break. Yet I knew the repercussions of this night would linger, and Michael's troubles were only just beginning. Word of that restaurant fiasco spread quickly, thanks in part to curious bystanders who recorded snippets on their phones. By the following afternoon, mutual friends were texting me, either in awe or shock, trying to piece together what had happened. I made no effort to hide the details. In fact, I felt it was my right, my duty even, to let the truth come out. Michael had prided himself on being the golden boy, the perfect husband, and the rising star at work. Now everyone realized it was just a polished mask. When I told his parents, his mother wept. "I'm so sorry, Jessica," she said over the phone, her voice shaky. "I never imagined he could do something like this." Even she couldn't defend her son's actions. His father was furious, muttering that he'd taught Michael better morals than this. As for me, the divorce process began quickly. Armed with evidence of his infidelity, I had a strong case. My lawyer was straightforward, telling me I had every chance of getting what I asked for. I wanted the house, and I wanted enough financial security to start over without struggling. Michael had no ground to stand on. Rumor had it, after Alexis told her father about the affair, the company took immediate action. Michael was suspended, pending an investigation into any misuse of corporate funds, because apparently he had charged more than a few business meals that looked suspiciously like romantic dates. It was no surprise that he tried to reach out to me. He called and left voicemails, sometimes sounding angry, other times desperate. "We can talk this out," one message pleaded. "Don't throw our life away." But all I could think was how he'd already thrown it away the day he decided to lie. I only answered one call, calmly telling him all communication should go through my lawyer. After that, I blocked his number. When I ran into acquaintances around town, I saw the pity in their eyes. But instead of feeling embarrassed, I felt oddly liberated. I had nothing to hide. My tears had dried up, replaced by a quiet confidence that this was not my shame to carry. Every new revelation, like his questionable expense reports at work, only made me realize that I was escaping a man who'd become a stranger. I started to think about the future. What would I do with the house once the divorce was settled? Would I move or stay and remake it in my own image? For the first time in months, I dared to consider life without the weight of his betrayal pulling me under. The divorce might take time, but emotionally, I was already free. And I suspected that before long, Michael would understand just how thoroughly he'd destroyed the comfortable world he once took for granted. Starting fresh was harder than I expected, but also more rewarding than I could have imagined. Once Michael was out of the house, I stood in the empty living room, taking in the silence. That very day, I pulled old photos off the walls, stacking frames in a corner. Some were wedding pictures. Others were snapshots of us smiling on vacations I now questioned. I kept a few pictures with friends and family, but I tucked every reminder of him into a box and shoved it into the attic. The space felt bare at first, like a stage set with no actors, but it was honest. It was mine. I gave the bedroom a fresh coat of paint, choosing a soft lavender instead of the neutral beige we'd had for years. It brightened the room in a way that lifted my mood each morning. I replaced old worn rugs with new, vibrant ones. In the process, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just about changing colors or redecorating. It was about reclaiming my home, my peace. Therapy became part of my routine too. My counselor helped me see how Michael's cheating was not my fault, and how his lies were more about his own insecurities than any shortcomings of mine. I had some tough sessions, facing the anger and heartbreak I'd buried under my growing thirst for revenge. Yet I walked out each time feeling a little lighter. I also leaned on Amanda, who dragged me out on weekends for hikes in the Blue Ridge Mountains. We'd walk for hours, breathing in the pine-scented air, pausing to watch the sun sparkle across mountain streams. Nature offered a kind of healing I never expected. With every step, I felt my chest loosen, my thoughts clear. I realized how small my old problems seemed against the backdrop of ancient peaks and endless skies. At night, instead of lying awake tortured by what-ifs, I read novels or watched comedies until I fell asleep with a smile on my face. Sometimes I still felt the pang of betrayal, especially when a familiar song played on the radio or I stumbled upon an old gift Michael had bought me back in happier times. But those moments came less and less, replaced by gratitude that I'd escaped worse heartache. Soon I felt strong enough to consider the idea of dating again. I didn't jump into anything serious, just simple coffee meetups or casual chats online. It felt strange at first, but it reminded me that not every man is Michael. I could still enjoy a laugh or a shared story without bringing along the baggage of my past. And to my surprise, A part of me even looked forward to new possibilities. As the paint dried on the walls and I settled into new routines, I realized I was forging a life that was bigger and brighter than the one I'd left behind. I hadn't just exposed a cheater. I'd freed myself to become someone I was proud of. Sometimes, the greatest transformations come from the darkest places. Little did I know I would be tested again before long. But by then, I'd gained enough strength to face whatever came next. A few months after the public blow-up, I thought the dust had settled. The divorce was moving forward smoothly, and Michael had all but vanished from my daily life. Yet one evening, as I was flipping through channels on TV, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Something in me hesitated, but curiosity took over. I picked up, and a shaky voice spoke. "Jessica, it's Michael." My heart rate kicked up. I wondered if he was calling from a new number to bypass the block I'd placed on him. Sighing, I asked what he wanted. He began stumbling over words, saying he'd seen the light and was desperate for closure. Closure, I repeated in my head, almost laughing. Where was his concern for closure when he was sneaking around behind my back? Still, I listened. He apologized, again, for everything, but it sounded hollow. Then he dropped a bomb. He'd lost his job. His boss, Alexis's father, had not only fired him, but was also considering legal steps, because Michael had apparently falsified some expense reports. Now, Michael was broke, living in a small studio, and feeling like the world had turned against him. Could we, he asked, at least talk face to face? Maybe we could find a way to be civil. I felt a flare of anger at his audacity, but a part of me, a sliver of the woman I once was, felt a twinge of pity. So, against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him at a local cafe the next day. I arrived early, not wanting him to catch me off guard. When he walked in, I hardly recognized him. He looked thinner, hair unkempt, wearing clothes that seemed unpressed. Gone was the suave, confident man who once boasted about his promotions. He sat down across from me, eyes downcast. He started by saying he was sorry, which I'd heard before, but this time his voice cracked. "I lost everything," he whispered, "and I know it's my fault." For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. This was the man I once loved after all. But then I remembered the nights I cried alone, the lies he told so effortlessly, and the life he tried to maintain at my expense. I told him as calmly as I could that while I understood he was hurting, I had no desire to rekindle any part of our relationship. "What do you want from me?" I asked. He had no clear answer, just guilt and regret pouring out of him. Maybe he wanted me to forgive him or to ease the weight of his mistakes, but that wasn't my job. I encouraged him to face his problems head-on, to find therapy if he needed help, but not to drag me back into his chaos. As I left, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. I realized that even if he was sincere in his remorse, I had moved on to a place where his words no longer held power. That encounter was the final straw, the last tie severed. Stepping back out into the sunlight, I knew in my soul I was free. And for once, that freedom didn't feel like revenge. It felt like closure. Standing at the edge of the overlook outside Asheville a year later, I watched the sun dip behind the mountains, painting the sky in streaks of purple and orange. The wind on my face felt cool, clean, and full of promise. I reflected on everything that had happened, the lies, the confrontation, the divorce. At times, it seemed like another life. In the beginning, I was fueled by a thirst for vengeance. I wanted Michael to feel as hurt and broken as I did, and in many ways, he faced consequences that were long overdue. But in the end, I realized something far more important. I wasn't healing just because he was losing. I was healing because I found my own strength, my own voice, and a circle of people who supported me without fail. Whether it was Amanda's loyal friendship, Alexis's unexpected empathy, or my own determination to reclaim my life, I saw how crisis can bring out the best in the people who truly care. I also discovered that sometimes you must stand up for yourself in a grand, dramatic fashion. Letting Michael's betrayal slide might have saved me some drama, but it also would have left me feeling powerless. Instead, by shining a spotlight on his lies, I seized control of a situation designed to keep me in the dark. It didn't solve my problems overnight, but it gave me the push I needed to break away and start anew. Leaning against the wooden rail, I thought about all the lessons I'd learned, mainly how vital it is to trust your instincts and value your worth. When someone belittles you or takes advantage of you, it's not your duty to quietly endure. It's your right to defend yourself, to call out that wrongdoing. At the same time, I realized that getting revenge isn't the ultimate goal. If I had stayed bitter, I would have given Michael a permanent hold on my happiness. Instead, my real victory came when I found peace and built a better life for myself. I also hope that anyone listening to my story would learn to spot warning signs early, to remember that nobody should settle for secrets and lies. If something feels off, it often is, and trusting your gut might just save you from deeper heartache. I looked at the sunset one last time, knowing that I still bore some scars, but those scars reminded me of my resilience, not my pain. I smiled, thinking of the quiet bungalow now filled with new memories, my house, my sanctuary, and in that moment, I felt something like pure freedom wash over me. The memory of betrayal no longer weighed me down. It was just another chapter in a story that I now had the power to finish on my own terms.